You're listening to Idea Collider, a show that explores the world of asymmetric learning. On this show, I will sit down with pharmaceutical experts and business leaders to discuss how to embrace uncertainty and the different learning style that follows. I'm your host, Mike Rea. Let's get into the show. Sherine, welcome to Idea Collider. I'm so delighted to have you here. And maybe let's start with you telling everyone a little bit about yourself and your journey to today.
Sure. My name is Sherine Khalil. I'm the Vice President and Chief Business Officer for Valor Compounding Pharmacy. We're located in Berkeley, California. We're licensed in 29 states, and we do sterile and non-sterile compounding. My background has always been in healthcare management and business. I went to UC Irvine thinking I was going to go into medicine and quickly changed my mind and ended up majoring in social ecology and minoring in public health. I worked in banking my entire college life, and I loved the business side. And I took a year off and decided I wanted to mix healthcare and business. So I went to NYU and I earned my master's degree in health policy and management with a focus on finance and management. And part of that program had me do an administrative residency, and I was placed at NYU School of Medicine, which is now Langone Medical Center. And I learned a lot about process and policy and how things impact accountability and transparency within the process to be more efficient. One of my major projects was to build out a faculty recruitment process, how to hire doctors. NYU was hiring doctors all the time, but they needed a place to have it more transparent. I moved from NYU Medical Center into NYU Child Study Center. I had a big focus in child mental health and worked in the research administration department, learned about grants and how those work, and NIH and NIMH and all of the different factions of the government grant process. That was really interesting. I met some amazing research scientists along the way. And then I was recruited to be the founding chief operating officer for child mental health at Child Mind Institute. I worked with the cream of the crop of clinical psychologists and psychiatrists. I think really highly of them and the work that they do. It's amazing. And then my husband matched in a residency program at UCSF, which brought us to California. And I took a couple years off having our children, and I then was recruited for this position to work in compounding pharmacy space. So I don't have actually a background in pharmacy. I've been now at Valor for 4.5 years. I started off as a quote unquote HR, and then that quickly grew into something new. And now looking at it, I run the operation on the entrepreneurial operating system. It's called EOS. And there's a book called Traction by Gino Wickman. And I follow this structure together with our CEO and the chief pharmacy officer, where we designed a little bit of a hybrid model that works for our industry because it is highly regulated. But I'm considered the integrator for the company, and I oversee operations. That's a little bit about myself.
That's a lot about yourself. It's fantastic. It's really interesting to see that kind of a range before you get to this role. And maybe just explore a couple of highlights there. So, because you went into sort of deep policy and then came back out. It's interesting to see someone go in and then come back out with more ideas than they had going in. How did you find that? Infrastructure, that institutional culture?
So it was interesting about it was that I had a direct connection to the dean's administration. And if I had an idea on how to improve something, they were open to listening. And that was helpful. But obviously in a large organization, you have several layers of approvals that you need to go through to get something implemented. I'm a fast thinker and I process quicker. So it does get frustrating at times when you want to roll something out and it's taking a little bit too long. And by the time it's rolled out, you should have had maybe 2 additional upgrades to that original idea. But then going into, nonprofit world and academic medicine is similar but a little different. You still have the three-pronged stool of clinical research and education. And within that, you do need to understand why policy exists and why it's important in order for you to come up with the right process that would work best for everybody involved. Like, understand what is the problem you're trying to solve.
Yeah, yeah. And did you know that about yourself, that you're a fast thinker who needed to work with others, or was that something that you learned along the way?
Oh, I learned along the way. It was, grad school was NYU. I went to NYU Wagner. They were amazing, and they had an awesome career office. And I can tell you that, you do learn your theory and everything that you need to in the class didactics, but what happens outside when you do the additional services, like they'll take you to the clubhouse and teach you how to conduct a business meeting at a dinner. And what are all the different pieces of silverware that are on your plate, and what you should order and why, and all these different things. Those kinds of things resonated more. And I also feel that we had done an activity at my employer, where you went around a table and a problem was presented to a group of you on your team. And if you're still thinking about the problem, stay where you are. If you've come up with one idea, move one chair over. And so I kept moving across the table, and my whole team was behind me. And then I realized, like, oh, I'm talking too fast. Like, I'm telling them a solution, and they're not ready to discuss the solution yet because they're still thinking about the problem. And I adapted from that. I learned a lot from that exercise because it helped me understand not everybody thinks and processes the same way.
How interesting. I feel like I can ask you loads of questions about cutlery now, and
I forgot all that.
how to behave with dinner. But that, I think, is a really interesting insight, right? That, how to get teams to do something that you might not do at the same pace is clearly a huge part of how organizations are better than individuals in many ways. It's really interesting that you had that insight early in your career.
Yes, it was. And it was really beneficial because you could tell also when you had deadline driven items that needed to be completed, I was better at my communication or my approach with individuals who, are some people they needed to have much more advanced notice. You can't just have them drop what they're doing and work on something. They needed 2 weeks worth of notice. Whereas others are okay, like no problem, and they swipe their desk clean and they're ready to go, and it's not stressful for them. So it was helpful to learn that.
And were those points, because there's clearly lots of choices that you've made about the next step, the next step, the next step. Were those intentional, or were those serendipitous, or did you have a plan, or was this
So definitely after my first job of residency, my plan was, can I stay in this role? Because I had all these ideas to improve what I built. And I did that. And then my second role was, I wasn't really sure, but I wanted to learn something new. And I went into research administration mostly because I wanted to get in the field of child mental health. I thought it was fascinating. And it was very helpful to do that. And then going into founding a new place for Child Mind Institute, that was probably more serendipitous. That was more, it presented itself. And I was really proud of the work that I did there. And I still am, but growing that place was difficult and a lot of hours, but it was this combination of a nonprofit with a for-profit clinical practice arm that also was interested in research. And so it became this new idea of academic medicine without the academic piece. There's no school attached to it, but you were still doing research, clinical, and education. And I really enjoyed that piece.
Yeah. And apologies for asking you this, but when you joined there, did you have a plan, or did you build one as you were flying the plane?
As we were going, we had a very influential board of directors, and that was my first time dealing with a board. But that definitely helped figure out what the next steps are and what the growth pattern would be. But I did end up growing fairly significantly, from maybe when I started, it was about 7 million. I grew it to 25 million with a team. And we had a very charismatic leader who did amazing at fundraising. But I definitely learned a lot about fundraising, how to host a gala, what are the different things and elements of those details, how to think about money and research and grants and focus, pitch, all the different pieces that you ends up applying elsewhere. But I didn't know it at the time. Like I learned as I was going, and it was almost like, Karate Kid, you get to the end and Mr. Miyagi's telling you, look at all these skills you just learned. And you had no idea you'd just been painting the fence for the whole time.
Yeah. And do you enjoy that part of your role?
I'm sorry?
Do you enjoy that part of the role, the, learning as you go piece?
Oh, yeah. I
Uncertainty?
love learning. I'm an avid learner.
Yeah.
I'm nonstop. I enjoy doing things, and I attend a lot of webinars and seminars all the time. I signed up Valor for Udemy Business because I wanted everybody else to learn. We created always learning as one of our core values at Valor, and it's definitely encouraged.
Yeah, and how would you? Because I know that part of your profile is this thing about deep curiosity. How would you kind of define your curiosity? Is it self sort of directional, or is there something else that underpins it?
No, I think it's a combination of I just enjoy learning different concepts and applying. I'm a deep thinker in that way. So it could be, for example, music lyrics, and I will listen to those music lyrics, and it will resonate for me, and I will think about that for quite a while. Or when you're deep in a movie or a series, there is a theme, there's some messaging that's happening, or even if it's subliminal, I like to kind of think about those things and understand, like, is that what the point was, what was happening here? And, and what did you learn from what you just saw or heard?
Interesting. So it's you're looking for new stimulus versus just having a prepared mind looking for, I can join two dots together now.
Yeah, I do that too. That piece I think is more out of the box thinking for me. I enjoy understanding, for example, in pharmacy, one of the biggest things that I learned was something called the blank canvas, right? And you use this blank canvas and you identify who are your channel partners, what's your revenue source, what's your cost. So like the biggest problem with pharmacy is you have one revenue source most of the time. And you're like, the biggest one is that you're getting prescriptions. So if you think about that, then in any other business industry, they would say, but you're not diversified. You have this one thing. What happens if that goes away? And there is this unsaid theory that how could it go away? It's medicine. Everyone's always going to need medicine. And you saw this happen a lot post-COVID or during COVID, because there was this mass exodus from these other industries and a lot more applicants into healthcare, because they felt that if this situation economically would repeat itself, they wanted a security and a job, right? So I definitely think about out of the box around, well, what are the areas that you could have service lines or provide other ways of generating products in pharmacy that isn't just based on prescription medicine.
Yeah, interesting. So this, I'm going to ask you a lot about compounding pharmacy because it's not an area I know very well, but it sounds like your underpinning was the search for competitive advantage in the space, not just to do the same as everyone else is doing, but to look for something different. Is that reasonable? That
is reasonable. And compounding is very unique. It's the old way of doing medicine, right? If you think about the pharmacist that's on the corner store and he has a mortar and pestle and he's making the medicine, and has a tech, or she has a tech helping them. That's how medicine was before big pharma happened. So there's still a need for compounding pharmacies, but they have decreased in number of size in the United States over several years due to regulations and, where the risk and liability of it, the sheer cost of running a compounding pharmacy. But for example, compounding pharmacies are great for, let's say you have a baby or an elderly parent who cannot swallow medicine. And the medication that they take can only come in pill form from big pharma. So a compounding pharmacy can change that dosage form into a liquid or a suspension to allow the person to take their medicine. Or in the past, you would hear people do pill cutters, right? And they would cut the pill to what is the strength that they needed. A compounding pharmacy could make you that exact strength, right? Instead of using whatever is commercially available to get to the strength you wanted. I think the other is women, and as they age, BHRT, bioidentical hormone replacement therapy, is a very big need for women who are naturally losing certain hormones as they age. It's just a natural progression. So you will find that functional medicine doctors or integrative medicine doctors, primary care doctors are interested in balancing those hormones. And so that there are some like major function areas, compounding pharmacies are your choice, and where you could get that medication that you need.
So what would be your hypothesis for why it's been in decline? But is there one reason or several reasons for the decline over the last 50 years or so?
A lot of it it's a highly regulated industry, and there were a few compounding pharmacies that, for example, if a single one doesn't do something correctly, it becomes a very big concern, obviously, because it creates medication errors. It can cause problems for people, or it can lead to death, right, in some cases. So the regulations keep increasing to a degree that it becomes not attractive for pharmacy owners to open a compounding pharmacy or to stay open, because it's costly to maintain quality and compliance. What we've done is we've invested in that area. So we actually have a dedicated compliance team, and we invested in software that big manufacturers use for compliance, but we use it on the pharmacy level. So where we are able to document any incidents, whether it is a patient complaint, a shipping error, like the package arrived and the medication was leaking, or any of that kind of information, as the complaints come in, it gets documented, and then our compliance team does a review every month and every quarter. And if you identify a certain pattern, it turns into what we call a corrective action plan. And that corrective action plan helps you identify what was the source of that problem and what are you going to do to change it to mitigate that problem from happening again. So we are very serious about that piece, for sure.
Yeah. So does Valor look like other compounding pharmacies, or does it look different by design?
It's amazing. It's an awesome facility. It's a closed door facility, but we have state-of-the-art equipment and lab. We just finished a construction renovation to expand a lab for non-sterile, non-hazardous compounding as well. And we're about 6,000 square feet. We have state-of-the-art equipment and training on that equipment to help us be more efficient, so that when we're efficient as a compounding facility and we can maintain our overhead fairly well, then that means we can translate that into pricing for the patients. So we have developed flat rate pricing, which is not common in compounding pharmacies. I believe we're likely the first to have rolled that out. And that gives some transparency and clarity about compounds. And you'll find that some patients love that, because they were not looking, they would negotiate with their doctors. Like if there was a compound that had more than one ingredient or more than one strength, they would talk to the doctor and say, do you think I could, do I really need that extra ingredient? Could you just take that out? Because the pharmacy is going to charge me more. But now that's not the case. Just prescribe what the patient needs, and it's going to be the same price. It's going to be okay.
So there's a couple of ideas there. One is your source of ideas for things that haven't been done before. Are they coming from inside? Are they coming from outside? What's the process for assessing, how your development?
If my colleagues are here, they would say I challenge a lot. So there'll be, when you say, like, where do you look for the sources, for example, on what you can and can't do, it will always be the Board of Pharmacy. You're always going to look to see what's the law say about this. Some of it is pretty direct, straightforward, and some of it you need to get clarification. And then you have the FDA, and then you have the DEA. So you're looking at all these different sources, and they disagree with each other sometimes, right? So I just challenge to a degree of my level of understanding. I'm not from pharmacy. I'm going to ask you questions. Please don't take it personal. I just would like to understand this better because the problem we are trying to solve is this. And if this is the problem we're trying to solve, what are give me 3-4 options that may address this problem and still maintain compliance and still maintain efficiency and still maintain staffing levels that are reasonable, right? And we kind of go down this road. And Traction does help us do this because even though there's brainstorming meetings and figuring these things out, the majority of the leadership team's time is always weekly discussing issues and then solving them together. And you end up hearing different perspectives because your human resources person has nothing to do with the lab, but then they chime in and you're like, oh yeah, that's a good point, And so you're going through that together.
Yeah, no, and it sounds like your source of, or your root of challenges is more creative. It's opportunity seeking versus, challenging, right? Because you're not telling them that they're doing it wrong. You're inviting them to do it better. Is that right?
Correct. And a lot of it could be system efficiency. You have all these tools, but you're not using them the way they're supposed to be used.
Yeah, yeah. And how do you feel about the kind of, are there any cultures, any hierarchy cultures within an organization like that? Because, think of a pharmaceutical company, typically has like medics and then there's everyone else. Does that apply where you are too?
That's funny you mentioned that because I just had this conversation this week. So definitely your pharmacists are of your hierarchy within a pharmacy. It is their license that matters and is on the line, as well as the pharmacy's license. You have certified technicians who also have licenses, but they're not at higher risk of losing them the way a pharmacist license could be. So there is that level of hierarchy. There is a level of design. Every pharmacy's organizational structure and design is different. We tend to design by department and what your function is. If I put somebody in charge of a place, what is it that you are accountable for? The 5 to 7 things you are actually accountable for at the end of the day. And if you had to report on a weekly number, what is that number? Are you looking at like the number of prescriptions you got in only, or are you looking at the number of prescriptions got in that got typed correctly? Right? So there's a difference between those things, and we definitely score those every week.
Yeah. Does someone have to get it right at the first attempt in that kind of a model? So, because clearly the metrics matter. Do you pilot? Do you do things that no one knows whether it's going to work or not? And how do you judge the success of those?
We do. A lot of it is you make your best educated guess. But we're very big we're a data-driven company. We use Tableau, and we have systems on the back end of Tableau like Snowflake that house all of our data and help us get the information we need. I'm very hesitant to make a decision if I don't see objective information. You will always have a part of you that has a gut instinct or an emotion to something. But as long as it's validated by what I see on the data, then we're going to give it a try and figure this out. I seek a lot of feedback, probably more than I think pharmacy staff in general are used to. They're used to just been given orders and just follow this way. I'm not that type of a leader. I do incorporate their thought process. Hi, I'm thinking about doing these things, and this is why. See this data, this doesn't make sense to me. Does it make sense to you? And then we kind of go through, and I make sure I definitely understand what I'm looking at and confirm. So is the problem people, process, or technology? It has to be one of these 3 things. Mm-hmm. So if it's one of these 3 things, then what are we going to solve and dig a little deeper together on that?
Interesting. So, and how far do you plan? Are you planning 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years into the future? And how much do you allow a curve to, 2022 is going to be fine. We'll take care of it in 2025. Where do you sit?
These are really good questions, Mike. I think, so we look at a 5-year big picture. We do a 3-year plan, and then we do a 1-year concrete plan, right? And in the 1-year plan, when you do it together, you identify your just high level goals. If by the end of December 2023, we could accomplish these 5 things, we would have been successful in this year. Okay, so if you know that and you think with the end in mind, then what are your first quarter goals going to be? and who's going to do what, and what are the three most important things you need to get done in that quarter per person, per leader. And that leader then can decide and delegate with their teams, and they'll cascade the messages down with their teams. But the goal is that everybody is working towards making that larger impact. And that goal is transparent across the company.
Because I think one of the challenges that often hits large companies is that the 5-year goals don't look like the 1-year goals or the next quarter goals, right? And so people are being judged against next quarter goals.
Yeah.
And if they're at odds with the 5-year goals, it doesn't really get tracked. And that becomes this recurring problem, right? That no one ever gets to the 5-year goals because they're so focused on the next month.
Yes, that's true. So the reason you would have to make adjustment, you meet quarterly also. So you'll do your quarterly, you'll reflect on what happened, plan your next quarter. So are you on track to meet that 1 year? Because your 1-year goal should have been aligned with your 5-year. Mm-hmm. So if you're not, then you're gonna need to come to terms with adjusting what your 5-year looks like, or something major has to happen. As an example, you can't close the door on everything. You need to leave some level of room for opportunity, because you don't know what might happen, especially in pharmacy. When COVID happened, I think there's a statistic out there, and don't quote me on this, but I think it's like 70 to 80% of United States medications or ingredients for medications come from out of the country. So when COVID happened, there was concern from all the wholesalers that the ships aren't going to make it to port. Yeah. So you have to be proactive, and we thought through that, and we talked to our entire supply chain, from FedEx to the wholesalers to the shippers, like to the chemical sourcers, and try to say, this is where we specialize in, and I want to make sure that we have prescription continuity for our patients. I need a 90-day supply. Now, that's a big investment, because those patients also aren't going to go see their doctors because the doctors weren't seeing patients. Yeah. So you have to think about all those pieces as you move along, but you do need to leave that opportunity, because also what came out of that was this pop-up of mental health telehealth organizations, which existed before, but when COVID happened, they definitely sprouted a lot more. And so we pivoted, and we were originally focused on BHRT and hormone replacement. And we still do that, and we fine tune that, and it's great. It's a good machine. It's working well for everyone. But we pivoted, and we invested in telehealth and mental health, and how do we serve those patients that are seeking that kind of treatment while maintaining due diligence, while maintaining compliance, because you're being prescribed ketamine troches, which are a controlled substance. And you have to be able to manage and make sure that you did everything correct, because these telehealth companies are not providers. They're a business. Yeah. So we have to go through all those hoops.
I was just looking at the news today on people sending ketamine through mail order. It's a fascinating insight into the US market. Yes. But I wanted to raise COVID, because clearly you've been there during quite a disruptive period, and you described some pivots. Can you maybe describe what quarter 1 2020 looked like for you, and then what quarter 2 had in it for you?
Yes, no problem. So I think rolling into where COVID was, the biggest concern was keeping up with the government and all the different changes for both our employees and what we can and can't do, and as healthcare workers. And there was a lot of confusion, like, are pharmacies considered healthcare workers? That was an interesting piece. Yeah. Because I was like, what do you mean? Yes. Like, isn't the answer yes? So we went through that for a little bit, and then we did proactive work. So we kind of switched gears again. We took all of our patient lists, and anyone who had refills due, contacted those doctors proactively, said, we know you're not seeing the patient, but these prescriptions are refills are due. Do you authorize these refills, to keep the patient? And the doctors end up making the decision, and they may do it based on a phone call, or they were also gearing up to do telehealth, which most healthcare didn't do. We still use fax machines, right? That gives you an idea of healthcare. So we pivoted that way. And then the third part was the government side of the funding to help support loss of employee or attrition or loss of revenue during those times. So keeping up with all those pieces that was our probably biggest challenge. And then I would say continually managing supply chain and making sure that there was no hiccup in not getting what we needed. Yeah. So, and the media, whatever was happening in the media related to these are the possible treatments for COVID turned into pharmacy conversations of, does hydroxychloroquine work or does something else? And there was a lot of different pieces of trying to figure that out. So it was really interesting at that time.
Of course. So were you ready to pivot? What is in your organization structure that makes you more agile or pivotable than another company?
I think it's our infrastructure is really strong. Our cybersecurity is very strong. That was also a big concern. Lots of healthcare were getting hacked during that time. Yeah. We had put things in place system-wise and technology-wise that allowed us to be scalable. And at the same time, you can descale, right? So if your infrastructure is there, no one thinks about like, what happens if I need to cut back? They just think about what happens if I need to grow. So the systems we had in place helped us have clean communication with our team and direct communication with our providers. And I think that definitely helped us. I also feel like we had a pretty resilient staff during that time. It was heavy communication on HR. We had a dedicated HR person during that time. So going through all of that, having that support system and someone to go to who specialized in a particular area gave everybody a level of confidence that, okay, we're going to be okay and things are moving forward, but still be careful. And we also had in our pharmacy facility, we have card reader access. You can't go into certain parts of the pharmacy without having appropriate access. We ship most of our medications out to patients. So we closed the door. There's no need to have that. And if somebody wanted to pick up, we went out to the curb to give it to them. So yeah, we put in a lot of infrastructure prior that allowed us to pivot well enough. It was still stressful, but at least it wasn't as stressful as we thought it could have been.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I've spoken to a few folks who certainly in 2020 were confident that things that they were doing then were going to be durable, right? That, oh yes, we've seen this and we're going to do this forever on. And they've definitely gone back to the way that they were doing it before. Have you had anything that you started doing differently that's become locked in as, oh, that was a great idea and we're going to do that more?
Actually, yes. We took that year as kind of like let's do everything we can to stay steady state, but also is there something we could be investing in now while things are kind of needing to be fixed so that we're going to come ahead in 2021. And the biggest thing we did was invest in our process for working with telehealth companies, because there is laws for practice of pharmacy that are different than practice of medicine. And investing in that legal infrastructure, we have a telehealth affiliate inquiry form on our website. We have a due diligence form that is on the back end. And we developed an entire sales process around telehealth, but also for purpose of compliance. And we've had to reject a few telehealth companies because they don't pass the due diligence piece for us, right? The way that we do business. A lot of it is just based on risk and liability, but that helped us. So when we got into 2021, we worked with very good telehealth companies and we continue to work with them. And that was a really strong investment on our part to come ahead.
Interesting. And is there any, you're very clearly very data or focused company. Is there any learning on the back end of things like unmet need, opportunity? How do those things filter through your organization?
Yes, we are not short of ideas. We're like so excited all the time.
There's other people coming up with ideas. Is that right?
Yes, lots of people come up with ideas, and it's they didn't know they could. And I think that's what's changed probably in the last couple of years, especially now implementing a leadership team and giving them more accountability and more decision making on their own. You hear more like, this piece, I got this feedback. I know it's just one doctor, but it could be affecting other doctors. Let's think about what this might be. Do we care about this? Is this something we need to fix? Is this something impacting others? And you start to hear different ideas and different approaches. And even those like small tweaks and small language choice, or can you add this button on this form, or it makes a big difference in what we do from a product and quality perspective.
So talk me through the kind of, because there's a discipline there, there's a process there. So you're encouraging them to come up with ideas, you're hearing them, you're figuring out how to implement them. What's the journey of an idea through your organization?
Yeah, so I hold a weekly 90-minute leadership meeting. And then within that leadership meeting, there are issues and discussions. And I don't participate directly in the solution all the time. I will encourage and I will make sure that we hear from everybody if they have something to say, because some people are louder than others in conversation, right? And then the issue that gets brought up is brought up by a leadership team member, and that member has to describe the issue. It's their show. You brought this issue up, so tell me what the issue is. And then we spend more time understanding that issue a little bit more, and we drill questions to figure out, well, you said that this was the issue, but is it really the issue? Is there something else that is actually causing this problem? And we find out what the real issue is, and then it turns into discussion. And then the question I throw back at them is, so what are your 3 options to fix it? And we kind of go through to understand what that is. Does this need to be taken offline in its own meeting? Do you have a solution right now that we should discuss and solve? Right. So we kind of go through that. But it was something everybody needed to get used to. They weren't used to that before. And I'll get texts sometimes through Zoom where someone will say, hi, Sherine, I think we should get these brochures printed. Can you tell me which print shop to use? No, you can decide which print shop needs to get this printed, and you have a budget, and let's figure out how to move that forward.
So in a situation like that, if you're gonna go back to the person that raises an issue, do you need different people for that, or can anyone work in a culture that is as accountable as that?
No, anyone can do it. I think part of it is experience, like learning that is an issue is probably your first step. So some of that is from managers who are already there, teaching their staff. The reason we're having this conversation is because this is an issue. And here's what the issue is and how it impacts whatever it is. Again, it's going to impact people, process, or tech. And if that's going to impact those things, money is always going to be involved, right? So we don't call it out from that perspective. But what we look at from that is people can be our employees. It can be a physician. It can be a patient. It can be a vendor, right? So we kind of think about that and say, okay, if we were to make this decision or we have this problem, where does that impact lie? So anybody can participate in that. And I encourage that feedback, and I'll probe questions if I don't hear from someone for quite a while.
Yeah. So is that a active culture when you joined, or have you built a culture on purpose, or has it been a kind of accidental evolution?
No, I built it on purpose. It was not there before. It was, a lot of independent pharmacies have one private owner who holds all the hats. They don't have an administrative team. Our CEO is Rick Nemi, and he invested a lot in the administration of Valor. He believes in having structure and is okay to invest in what we need to protect the business and to protect the patients and the physicians. So having that support definitely makes a big difference. We don't have venture capitalists. We're not publicly owned. That also makes a big difference. And I think from that perspective, you can be a pharmacy who's an independent pharmacy who wants to only be a single owner or top-down type structure of feedback, and not necessarily care what employees have to say. And you could be fine with that. You could be fine with just staying steady. What we're trying to do is grow and have a little bit more awareness about why compounding is important and where we can help and what we can do to support. And in order to do that, you can't do that alone. That needs to have a group think, right? You'll still have a single decision maker and a single person who's accountable. You can't have more than one person accountable, but you can still get consultation from people who are in the weeds doing the work, right? So that helps you be stronger in your decisions.
Yeah. So in your profile, clearly you are also a consultant. I'd be interested in, because you've got this thing you built, and then there's this must be a bunch of places you go when you go, oh, okay, here's what we're going to do first.
Yeah.
Talk me through your kind of landing day sort of thought process in a new place.
This was like from graduate school on. I've always loved business, and I'm not really. I love healthcare, and I'm good at that piece. But I enjoy learning about new businesses and how they work and what their challenges are. And I get consulted a lot from people who they need to hear a different perspective or an outside in, where they're facing a particular challenge, and what are my thoughts? And it's as general as that can be. We end up drilling down and peeling back the onion and understanding that's not actually your problem. Like, this is the problem. And here are some solutions, and here are some resources, and here are some thoughts. But you got to do what's comfortable for you and what fits best for your culture. So I've worked with after school programs. I worked with an at-home chef, and she wanted to start an in-home dinner experience and needed help building out a website and knowing what her service options are and how to price it, what to do for appointments, what to do for cancellation. So I learned a lot along the process because I like asking those questions and understanding what are all the things you need to think about that will make you successful, and what are the risks in that as well.
Yeah. And do you bring any of that back to Valor? Did you regard yourself as an insider or an outsider at Valor?
I know I'm definitely an insider. I'm in there all the time. But I do. I think it's just that creative process of solution finding, or thinking and challenging. So I will, and the staff know this about me as well. So they'll ask questions, and they'll, you can't say, for example, that we're doing okay and everything is moving forward. But then if I see on the data that, well, but now you're like 50% behind or something is, you're going to need to explain, like, help me understand when you say this, what does that mean to you? So I definitely challenge on that end. And then I'm always looking for, what is the actual problem? Is it because our process is convoluted, needs to be streamlined? Is it, how long does it take to train someone? Is it taking you way too long? Is that because of process, or because the technology, or because the person? Did we hire the wrong person? Right. So we have to kind of go through and drill down, because it's, at some point, I've always been a no nonsense person. And I move forward in that direction, but I have built great relationships, and leadership and mentorship of people are important to me. And teaching them and guiding them and letting them thrive in their world is important to me. I like to see people grow and be professional.
Yeah, but it sounds as though, I mean, if I was to capture you in a phrase, it would be opportunity seeking, right? Your curiosity, it's a forward-facing sort of journey for you, that you're not satisfied with the way things are. You're looking for how they could be better, and I guess that's sometimes in organizations people want to hear good news instead of problems or issues. Leaning into that must be a kind of core career skill for you so far.
Yeah, there's this program, and there's like a assessment for it, and it's called, like, you could check your saboteurs. It's the opposite of your strengths. But like, one of my saboteurs is restlessness, right? For example. And that restlessness can be positive for me because it just lets me drive things a little bit more to the next level. But I did grow up in a household where, I come back with an A, and the question was, why didn't you get an A+, right? So so that level is there and established, and it's taken a lot from, that's my personal, like, professional coaching and awareness of myself to not impart that on others. Like, I try to make sure that I understand and level-headed about everybody learns differently and at a different pace. But it's definitely something that I focus on in self-awareness type of skill to make sure like, oh, no, you did a good job. I just think you could do better. I leave that last line out, you know?
Yeah, but the awareness of team, I think, is not something that everyone gets taught as they go through. It's interesting, and when you decided to leave the kind of medical sort of trajectory, that you're not taught to involve teams necessarily in that profession. So,
Mhm.
plus your restlessness must be a good comment. Where do you go for inspiration? What's your, is this your longest tenure at a company?
No, NYU and Childmind. NYU. I was there for 9 years.
Okay, yeah. So where do you go for inspiration now? What's your kind of 2022 outside in inspiration?
It's a good question. I think so. I just recently joined Chief. It's an organization for women leaders,
Mhm.
and I'm really enjoying the network and the group of people and learning. Conferences are back up, so I'm excited for that. And that's I'm attending a few of them this year, and I enjoy that. I like networking and meeting with people because I end up learning a lot about what they do, and sometimes it's applicable, and sometimes I can help them, and I like helping people. So that's inspiring for me. And then I have two really active boys who are 9 and 5. And sometimes, like listening to how they talk to each other and break down a problem or understand why something happened, it's refreshing to think like a kid,
Yeah,
because the way their mind works, it's so simple. Mom, I know why we're late. It's because you took that last phone call. That's why we're late. So it's very clear about what it is. And so it's just they're a great inspiration for me as well. And my husband is a key opinion leader in robotic surgery and does bariatric and laparoscopic uh, procedures in the abdomen. So hearing what he goes through and listening to stories around patients and decisions he has to make on an everyday basis, it's also inspiring. Like, it's also thinking through, what are all the decisions that I made? They might not be necessarily life threatening or life changing, but there are pieces there where, had I not made that decision, what would have happened? So a bit of reflection and appreciation for, accomplishments and acknowledgement of what those are.
yeah. No, you sound like a remarkable reflector on everything that you're kind of you turn around, you look at it differently. Um, any books that you're or anything you read outside of that you'd recommend to people?
Yeah. Well, right now there was one that I really liked. I definitely Traction by Gino Wickman, but um, I read this one book called Influence, and it's
Mhm.
by Robert Cialdini.
Mhm.
And I thought that was really cool. And there was another one called Start with No by Jim Camp. And the concept of the influence one, I would take examples of what I learned in the book, and I would give scenarios to our business team. And I would explain to them, like, okay, this situation happened, so why did the sale go through? And how get them to have some critical thinking about what changed and how would you apply this to pharmacy.
Yeah.
So I'll take like things that have nothing to do with pharmacy and see how people think, how they apply. I really like those two books. And Influence was really interesting because it was based on like studies from the 1960s on how people make decisions.
Yeah.
I liked that. And then Start with No by Jim Camp was um, a negotiation type skill, and what happens if you say no. And he walks you through some course examples around that, and it is really interesting as well.
Amazing. I always get to this point and wish I had another hour, but I'm aware that we've got about 1 minute left. And my next question is always: is there anything that you wish that I'd asked you that I didn't on the way through?
It's one of those, this compounding space is so small. Like,
Yeah,
the it's only like 7,500 compounding pharmacies in the United States. That's
yeah,
not a lot.
yeah.
Um, I don't know. I think, and a lot of it you can get, it's the compliance piece is so difficult because it's constantly changing or being interpreted.
Do you think it's set to, you're going to get 7,500? Is it going to be 1,000 in 5 years' time, or is it going to be 75,000 in 5 years' time?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know enough about that. I think it's growing, and I think they're being for sale a lot. I've seen lately. And now there's a bunch of consultancy companies now that talk about that they specialize in compounding pharmacy space, and they're going to help you grow your compounding pharmacy.
That's a consultant.
But then it's interesting, right, Mike? Because you talk to everybody else as well. So how are you differentiating what one compounding pharmacy does versus another? I thought that was the concept of what like when Apple rolled out the iPhone, all these other third-party companies came out with various chargers and cases, and had nothing to do, and they made a whole business model based on this one product. And that's what I feel like is happening with compounding pharmacies. There are these ancillary things, but it's starting off in this consulting space. Yeah,
interesting. Well, I've been interested because I don't actually trust management consultants much, because that sort of idea that everyone does the same thing, and you should do this by this point, and you go, wait a minute, I thought we were going to be competitively, gaining advantage from doing this, but as you say, everyone's getting the same advice.
Yes, and that's concerning because, and I don't, NDAs are NDAs, but hard to enforce.
Tacit knowledge is hard to forget the next time you go and see somebody. But yeah, and that idea that you might treat Valor differently than another organization on purpose rather than not just benchmarking it is, I think that's part of the problem with consulting in general. But
I can give you an example. We attended a conference. So prior to attending the conference, we make a pain medication, topical pain cream and gel that has no opioids in it, and we make them in large batches. And most orthopedic surgeons or pain management specialists, they prescribe this for patients who are trying to wean off opioid medication post-surgery or post-injury. Okay, in order to fill the number of prescriptions that we get, we needed a way that would be calibrated to exactly the quantity they're supposed to get inside the vial. So our chief pharmacy officer thought out of the box, and she contacted a restaurateur. And the restaurateur had a donut jelly filler. And the jelly filler is calibrated to put jelly in donuts at a particular quantity. So they discussed, they figured it out, they were able to test it, and it works. So we had this. We had a tour of wholesalers to come in, and they, to talk about drugs and ingredients and what we need as a company. And we went to this, they saw this, and then we went to this conference early this year, and we saw them on a table, and they had the jelly filler, and now they're selling it and training for it. And we were like, where'd you get that idea? So it definitely happens. And I think that's one of the bigger concerns. And we're very closed door on a lot of our facility, our floor plans, what we have, for those exact reasons.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I think that might be true, but I suspect your special sauce is in thinking about it in the first place.
Yes.
It's like if Tesla is happy that it doesn't have IP on most of what it does, that's only because they believe they can stay ahead anyway. So, and I believe that about you. So this has been really enjoyable, Sherine. And
Thank you.
And people want to find you. Is it easy? I know your Twitter handles and so forth.
Yes, I'm on LinkedIn under Sherine Khalil, Khalil. My first name is Sherine, and you can reach me by email at skhalil@v like Victor CPRX.com.
Amazing. Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure.
Yes, nice to meet you too, Mike. Thank you for having me. This was really fun to talk about. I don't spend enough time out loud reflecting, so this was great.
I'm pleased that we gave you that mirror. But thank you.
Thank you.
That's it for this week's episode of Idea Collider. To continue the conversation, visit our website at ideapharma.com. Follow us in your favorite podcast app so you never miss an episode. Don't forget to rate and review us on Apple Podcast. Until next time, I'm Mike Rea, wishing you great success.